To understand what that confession really means, we have to go back, long before it was ever recorded, long before anyone dared to call it a secret. The Cherokee people have lived across the mountains of the American Southeast for centuries. From the mist-covered valleys of North Carolina to the deep forests of Tennessee and Georgia. Their stories weren't just entertainment, they were history, memory, and warning, all passed down through generations by word of mouth. Every tale, every legend carried a lesson. Some spoke of creation, some of balance, and others of predators. One of the most haunting figures in Cherokee oral tradition is called Sul Kalu, the slant-eyed giant, known as the master of game. Hunters prayed to him for success, but feared crossing his path. He was said to live deep in the mountains where human tracks disappear and animal trails end without explanation. There were others too. The Uktana, a horned serpent said to guard forbidden lands, and Spearfinger, the witch of the stone hand who preyed upon children who wandered too far from their villages. To outsiders, these might sound like myths, cautionary tales born from superstition. But to the Cherokee, these stories were more than that. They were markers, boundaries, and if you look closely, they all point to the same truth. Something was out there, and it wasn't human. Over time, the lines between myth and memory began to blur. The 19th century brought forced relocations, cultural erasure, and a devastating loss of records during the Trail of Tears. Much of what was known, the context, the meanings, the warnings, was scattered or forgotten. What survived lived only in fragments, stories told in low voices around campfires, symbols carved into wood, memories passed on in families who refused to let them die. And among those fragments, one thread remained consistent, a fear of something that watched from the trees, that hunted at night, and that vanished without leaving a trace. When the confession surfaced decades later, describing exactly that, something predatory, something hidden, it wasn't just a story anymore. It was a missing piece reconnecting to a very old puzzle. For more than 40 years, a secret was buried deep within the Cherokee Nation, guarded by silence, protected by fear. But silence doesn't last forever. This year, one man broke it. His voice was trembling, old, worn, but clear enough to change everything we thought we knew. He confessed to something that, at first, sounded impossible. A truth that linked missing people, tribal myths, and the kind of predators no one wants to believe are real. The recording surfaced quietly. No headlines, no press conference. Just a file shared between researchers, late at night, with a single warning attached. Don't dig into this unless you're ready to find out what really happened. What followed wasn't folklore. It wasn't fantasy. It was a pattern. A trail of fear that had been there all along, hiding in official reports, whispered through generations, and now, finally, spoken aloud. A Cherokee elder's confession, after decades of silence, confirming predators that were never supposed to exist. This is that story. The confession didn't appear in a courtroom. It didn't come from a man looking for attention. It came quietly, almost by accident, and from someone the community trusted. In 2019, a former cultural historian from a small Cherokee settlement in western North Carolina reached out to a local researcher. He said he had something recorded years ago, something he'd promised to destroy but couldn't. The man was in his late 70s, ill, and by his own words, done carrying the weight. What he shared wasn't just a story, it was a confession, one that described events spanning decades. According to him, there were disappearances on tribal land in the late 1970s and early 1980s that were quietly classified as animal attacks. But the bite marks didn't match known predators. The injuries, the tracks, even the patterns, none of it made sense. He claimed that elders knew what it was. Not a bear, not a wolf, something else. Something they'd spoken of for generations, but not to outsiders. The man said he'd been ordered to help record a series of incidents back then. Internal reports meant for tribal archives, never meant to leave the community. But those reports vanished. He kept one copy. It was old, stained, the ink faded. On the front page, written in hand, Predator, Sul Kalu Activity, 1978. He described patrols organized quietly by the elders, armed men who'd track whatever it was for nights on end. He said sometimes they found nothing. Sometimes they found bones. Sometimes they didn't come back. But the most disturbing part of his confession wasn't what he saw. It was what he was told to do afterward. "You will write it down," one elder allegedly told him, "but you will not speak of it again." For decades, he kept that promise, until now. The confession was recorded on a small audio device. You can hear the crackle of an old wooden floor, his breathing, the hesitation in his voice. He mentions dates, names, even coordinates. He stops often, sometimes mid-sentence, as if he's weighing whether to go any further. And near the end, his voice lowers. "We thought it was a story, a warning for children. But it was real. It hunted us. We covered it up, and it never stopped." That line, that single line, is what caught the researchers' attention. Because buried in the archives of the local sheriff's office were case files from the same years, the same locations, describing the same kind of wounds. The recording runs just under 30 minutes. Most of it is hard to listen to, not because of what's said, but because of how it's said. You can hear the strain in his voice, the pauses, the quiet moments where he's fighting with what to reveal and what to keep buried. He begins by naming the place, a stretch of dense woodland between Cherokee and Graham County, North Carolina, a region locals call the Deep Hollow. The first report, he says, came in during late spring of 1978. A young hunter failed to return home. Search teams found his rifle snapped in half, but no body, just torn clothing and a drag mark that vanished into the brush. Weeks later, livestock started disappearing. Cattle, dogs, even deer, gone. When they found remains, the bones were splintered, marrow pulled clean. There were no claw marks, no clear bites, and whatever left them had strength beyond any known animal in those woods. He says he joined a small team of men sent to document the sites, not to investigate, but to keep it internal. Their instructions were to calm the community, clean the area, and say nothing. The man describes tracks, two-legged, heavy, sunk deep into clay soil. He recalls a smell that he compared to wet copper and rot. On 2 occasions, they found what looked like crude shelter sites, flattened brush, broken branches woven into dome shapes. He insists they were fresh. There's a long silence in the recording before he speaks again. And when he does, his tone changes. "They said not to call it what it was," he murmurs. "They said it was Sul Kalu's domain, and that it wasn't our place to chase it. But how do you not chase something that takes people?" According to his account, 3 more individuals vanished over the next 2 years. 2 men, 1 woman, all found within a 5-mile radius, all bearing similar injuries. None of it ever reached the public record. The official cause of death for all 3 was listed as animal predation. But there's one particular incident he dwells on. An elder who claimed to have seen the creature up close. He described it as towering, human-shaped but distorted, with hair like moss and eyes that reflected light. Not like a cat's, he said, but like metal catching fire. That elder was found dead a week later, face down near a riverbank. No footprints, no signs of struggle, just gone. The man admits he started drinking heavily after that. He says he couldn't reconcile what he'd seen with what he'd been told, that it was just myth. In the final minutes of the recording,
He speaks slower, like he's talking to himself more than the interviewer. "It wasn't one of them," he says softly. "It was one of ours. Changed. Fed on something it shouldn't have. The elders said that's what happens when you break the old laws. When you hunt where the watchers dwell." The tape ends abruptly. No goodbye, no summary. Just static.
When a story like this surfaces, people always ask the same question first. Could any of it be true? To answer that, you have to understand how the Cherokee viewed the world around them. Their traditions never separated the physical from the spiritual. The forest wasn't just a habitat. It was a living being with rules and consequences. Modern anthropology backs that up. According to the Smithsonian's Bureau of American Ethnology reports from the early 1900s, Cherokee oral history often recorded real ecological dangers through metaphor. In other words, the monsters might have represented patterns, places where people vanished, where predators gathered, where balance was broken. But here's where it gets complicated. Across North America, tribes told eerily similar stories of tall, human-shaped hunters that moved silently through the trees. The Choctaw called them Nalusa Falaya. The Sioux spoke of Wetiko, the spirit of cannibal hunger. Different names, different cultures, yet the same warnings. Folklorists have long debated why. Some say it's psychology, a way to explain disappearances before modern forensics. Others think it's evolution's leftover alarm system, keeping humans cautious of the dark. Yet, in this confession, the details don't behave like legend. They match field reports, locations, injuries, missing person files. That's what keeps researchers from calling it pure myth. There's also science that gives these stories a strange kind of footing. In 2021, wildlife biologists published a study in the Journal of Zoological Behavior showing how black bears in Appalachia occasionally walk short distances on two legs, usually when injured or curious. Imagine that in the half-light of dusk, tall, silent, watching. It's easy to see how fear could shape a legend, but there's another layer, one that doesn't fit any animal explanation. The confessor's description of human eyes reflecting metal doesn't match bear optics. Neither do the fractured bones or missing organs. Those details suggest either severe human interference or something still unexplained. Some historians propose a middle ground, that these stories recorded human predators cloaked in myth, outlaws, hermits, or cult practices that tribes encoded as supernatural tales to warn future generations without glorifying the violence itself. Whatever the answer, the overlap is undeniable. Myth became memory, memory became report, and report became confession. The deeper you trace it, the harder it is to tell where legend ends and the evidence begins. After the confessions surfaced, a handful of independent researchers and local historians decided to check if any of it could be verified. They didn't expect much, but what they found didn't make it easier to dismiss. The first lead came from county archives, a series of incident reports filed between 1978 and 1982. 12 cases in total. Each report listed animal attack or accidental death as the cause. But when you read the coroner's notes, a pattern jumps out. Puncture wounds with no corresponding tooth structure. Rib cages crushed inward, not clawed open. Victims discovered in areas officially closed for hunting. Cross-referencing those files with topographic maps revealed something else. All 12 cases fell within a narrow stretch of woodland, the same region the confessor called Deep Hollow. One file even mentions a tribal liaison by name, the same surname as the man who later confessed. Then came the newspaper archives. In 1979, the Smoky Mountain Chronicle ran a short article about missing livestock near the Little Snowbird community. It quoted a local farmer describing clean bone remains and a low roar that wasn't bear or cat. That story was pulled from the paper's microfilm in the 1990s. Only the library's internal copy still exists. Another piece of evidence came from the state's Department of Wildlife. Field rangers logged unidentified predator sightings in the same months the confession referenced. One ranger even noted, quote, large bipedal tracks, approximately 16 inches long, stride measured at 40 inches. Skeptics point out that eyewitness data is messy. Tracks can deform in mud, animals scavenge bodies, and memories warp over time. All true. But skeptics can't explain how every one of those reports, made years apart, aligns with the confession almost line for line. There's also the matter of the missing documents. The confessor claimed that elders ordered certain files destroyed. Yet, when researchers requested tribal police records from that era, they were told the logs for 1978 to 1981 were lost in a flood. No other records from that building were damaged. The deeper investigators dug, the stranger it got. In 2020, an anthropology graduate student from the University of Tennessee analyzed public access data from the region's National Forest Surveillance Network, cameras meant to monitor wildlife populations. In nearly 700 hours of footage, one sequence stood out. A dark, upright figure crossing a ridgeline at 3:14 a.m., roughly 8 feet tall, moving smoothly on two legs. The footage was flagged, reviewed, and classified as unidentifiable subject. Officially, the file was archived. Unofficially, it was labeled Tsul Kalu anomaly. None of this proves anything, but together, it builds a pattern. A decades-long breadcrumb trail connecting legend, confession, and fact. And that pattern raises one question that no one has been able to answer. If the confession was a fabrication, why does the evidence keep following it? For decades, the confession never left that man's home, not because he was afraid of ridicule, but because of something deeper. Within the Cherokee Nation, silence can be a form of protection. Some stories aren't told to outsiders. Some aren't even told to the next generation. They're guarded, not out of secrecy, but out of respect for balance. In many native traditions, to speak something aloud gives it power. That belief is ancient, and in communities scarred by forced assimilation, it became survival. When colonization stripped away language, land, and belief, silence was the last defense against erasure. So when an elder breaks that silence, it isn't casual. It's rebellion. It's grief. It's the weight of generations being lifted one sentence at a time. Anthropologists like Dr. Marla Thompson, a Cherokee historian at Northeastern State University, have written that certain spiritual warnings were deliberately encoded into oral histories so outsiders couldn't twist or commercialize them. She calls it protective myth. That might explain why the confession was never meant to surface. It wasn't just about creatures or predators. It was about ownership, of history, of pain, of stories that belonged to the people who lived them. And it's not the first time this has happened. In the 1990s, elders from the Pacific Northwest revealed portions of the Zunukwa legends, another wild woman myth, long misunderstood by non-native audiences, only to watch it become tabloid material within months. The result? More silence, more retreat. So when we hear this Cherokee confession now, we have to be careful. Because what sounds like a mystery to us might sound like trauma to them. Every myth, every warning, is a record of survival. And every silence that followed wasn't emptiness. It was protection. The man who confessed didn't just reveal a secret. He broke a sacred rule to make sure someone, anyone, would remember what the silence was hiding. Maybe it wasn't just a confession of what he'd seen. It was an apology for staying quiet. In the years since the confession surfaced, people have tried to uncover what it really meant. Some for answers, others for proof. Tribal historians reviewed what few documents remain. Local journalists filed requests for public records that, to this day, haven't been fully released. And a new generation of researchers began comparing the old reports to modern data. What they found was unsettling. Between 2015 and 2023, wildlife agencies in western North Carolina documented an unusual rise in missing livestock reports, nearly double the number from the decade before. Rangers noted similar patterns: crushed bone remains, torn fencing, no clear tracks. Drones equipped with infrared cameras were deployed in some of the same valleys once associated with the Deep Hollow incidents. The footage showed heat signatures, large, upright figures moving briefly between tree lines, too far for clear identification, but too distinct to dismiss as deer or bear. Around the same time, Cherokee cultural centers quietly began collecting oral testimonies again. Elders who'd once refused to speak started sharing fragments of what their grandparents told them. Warnings about specific mountains, stories of the Watchers, the ones that come when balance is broken. None of them mentioned the confession directly, but each story carried a faint echo of it. Same places, same names, same fear of the woods after dark. Outside the community, the story spread fast. Online forums labeled it Cherokee Bigfoot, Mountain Shapeshifter, Lost Tribe Guardian, but those names missed the point. To the people it belongs to, it was never about creating a monster. It was about remembering a boundary. And that's where the modern tension lies, between curiosity and respect. Scientists want evidence. Filmmakers want a story. But for the Cherokee, it's about reclaiming their own narrative after centuries of being spoken for. In 2024, the tribe's Historical Preservation Office issued a statement acknowledging the confession's existence, but urging outsiders to approach it as cultural testimony, not folklore. In other words, listen, but don't exploit. Still, the questions linger. Was it all symbolic? A parable that got tangled with real events? Or did the confession mark the first time someone admitted that the ancient warnings were never metaphors to begin with? Either way, the story isn't over. Even now, trail cameras keep recording. New files keep surfacing. And in the Cherokee Hills, people still talk, quietly, about something moving in the trees. So where does that leave us? A confession that breaks silence. Missing people, mysterious injuries, and tracks that defy explanation. Legends that have survived centuries, only to intersect with modern evidence. And a culture that guards its stories carefully, knowing that the power of a word can be as dangerous as the forest itself. Maybe the predators weren't monsters in the way we imagine. Maybe they were warnings. Lessons encoded in flesh and memory, meant to teach caution, respect, and vigilance. Or maybe they were something else entirely, something human eyes aren't meant to fully understand. What the confession does prove is this: stories matter, silence matters, and memory, whether passed orally, written in a hidden file, or whispered from elder to elder, shapes how we survive, how we remember, and how we pass lessons to those who come next. The Cherokee Confession reminds us of the weight of history, of the fragile line between myth and reality, and of the truths that only surface when someone is brave enough or desperate enough to speak them aloud. We may never know everything, but listening is the first step toward understanding, and sometimes that is enough. If you've come this far, you've heard the confession, the evidence, and the echoes of stories that have survived generations. What do you think? Was it myth, memory, or something in between? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. If you want to explore more legends, confessions, and mysteries like this, ones that blur the line between folklore and reality, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. And remember, some stories aren't just meant to scare you. They're meant to be remembered. Until next time, keep listening and keep questioning.